After discovering her husband's affair with her best friend, she invites them both to dinner. But no one expects how the night will end. It started with a glance. Not even a glance, really more like a flicker. The kind of moment that should pass unnoticed, but, for some reason, lodges itself in the back of your mind. We were at a barbecue, the kind of casual gathering Tom and I had hosted 100 times before. Our friends were laughing, passing drinks around, and the scent of grilling meat filled the air. It was all perfectly normal until I saw it. The way Tom's eyes lingered on Rachel just a second too long. The way he smiled at her, softer than usual, more intimate. I shook it off at first. After all, Rachel was my best friend. We'd been inseparable since college, and Tom had known her almost as long as he'd known me. If anything, they were like brother and sister. But the flicker nagged at me, gnawing at the back of my mind in a way I couldn't ignore. As the weeks passed, the flickers turned into something more. Tom started working late, and Rachel became distant, canceling plans at the last minute with vague excuses. The easy friendship the three of us once shared grew strained, like an invisible wall had formed between us, thickening with every secret they didn't know I'd already begun to suspect. One evening, while Tom was working late again, I found myself alone at home, my mind swirling with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. I'd never been the paranoid type, but there was something wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. So, I did what I told myself I wouldn't do. I picked up Tom's phone. It sat on the kitchen counter, the screen glowing softly in the dim light. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was a line, a breach of trust I'd never crossed before. But something inside me, maybe it was fear, maybe it was anger, pushed me forward. My fingers moved on their own, and within moments, I was scrolling through his messages. At first, there was nothing, just mundane conversations with colleagues, his brother, and some old friends. But then I saw it, a message from Rachel. I clicked on it, my breath catching in my throat. The first message was harmless enough, small talk about an event they'd attended together months ago. But as I scrolled further, the tone changed. It was subtle at first, just a few flirtatious comments that could have been passed off as jokes. But the more I read, the more explicit they became. Words of affection, late-night confessions, promises to see each other again. The last message sealed it. I miss you. I can't wait until the next time we're together. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. My head spun, a sick feeling rising in my throat. They weren't just having an affair. They'd been carrying on this sickening betrayal for over a year. A whole year of lies. A year where I'd been blind to the truth, trusting both of them completely while they laughed behind my back. I could barely breathe. My legs felt weak, and I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing with images I couldn't control. Tom and Rachel together, sneaking around behind my back, laughing at my ignorance. I felt foolish, humiliated. But more than anything, I felt rage. A burning, seething anger that threatened to consume me. I could have confronted them right then. I could have called Tom, screamed at him, thrown his phone across the room. I could have texted Rachel, told her exactly what I thought of her, of the kind of person who could betray her best friend like that. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in the quiet of our living room, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me, and made a different decision. One that surprised even me. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Not in the way they would expect. If they thought they could keep me in the dark forever, they were wrong. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I wiped away the tears that had begun to well up, forcing myself to breathe, to think clearly. If they wanted to play games, fine. I could play too. I would invite them both to dinner. It was a week later when I sent out the invitations. I called Rachel first, my voice light, casual, like nothing had changed. "It's been ages since we all hung out together," I said, forcing a laugh. "You know how life gets in the way. How about you come over for dinner next Friday? Just the three of us like old times." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, a hesitation that I could almost hear through the phone. "Oh, sure, that sounds great," Rachel finally said, her voice a little too high-pitched, a little too eager. "It'll be nice to catch up." Tom was easier to convince, though he looked a little confused when I mentioned the dinner. "You want to invite Rachel?" he asked, glancing at me over his coffee cup the next morning. "We haven't seen her much lately." I smiled sweetly, hiding the fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Exactly. I thought it would be fun to get everyone together again. Just a quiet night. Nothing fancy." He shrugged, clearly relieved that I hadn't noticed anything strange between them. "Sounds good," he said, kissing me on the forehead as he left for work. "I'll be home early." That was the moment I realized just how deep their betrayal went. They were so used to lying, so confident that I was clueless, that neither of them suspected a thing. It was almost laughable. I spent the next few days meticulously planning the evening. I cooked their favorite dishes, Tom's obsession with rosemary chicken and Rachel's love for red wine braised beef. I polished the good silverware, arranged candles on the table, and set the scene for what they thought would be a pleasant, casual evening. But I knew better. As the evening approached, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My hands were steady, my face calm. If someone had told me weeks ago that I'd be preparing for a dinner like this, I would have laughed at them. But now, in this moment, I felt in control. I wasn't the victim. I was about to show them both exactly who I was. The doorbell rang. Showtime. What would you do in Sarah's position? Confront them immediately, or wait and plan your next move? How do you think the dinner will unfold? Leave your thoughts below. The doorbell rang again, pulling me out of my thoughts. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my dress before heading to the door. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I opened the door, and there they were, Tom and Rachel, standing side by side, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "Hey," I said brightly, my voice so calm it shocked me. I stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. "Come on in. Dinner's almost ready." Rachel smiled nervously, her eyes darting around the room. Tom gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, the same kiss he had given me for years, like everything was normal. They followed me into the dining room, making small talk about traffic and work, while my mind churned beneath the surface, quietly calculating every move I would make tonight. I led them to the table, where I'd set out an elaborate spread. Wine glasses, plates gleaming under the candlelight, everything perfectly in place. It was a dinner that, on the surface, looked like any other. But tonight, the air was different. It crackled with tension, even if neither of them realized it yet. "This looks amazing, Sarah," Rachel said, taking her seat. Her voice was too bright, too forced. I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she picked up her wine glass. She took a sip, and I could see the strain in her smile. She knew. Somewhere deep down, she knew what was coming. "Thanks," I said, taking a seat opposite her. I glanced at Tom, who seemed relaxed, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. He poured himself some wine, chatting away about his day at the office, not once noticing the way I watched them both. I forced myself to smile, to engage, but all I could hear were the echoes of their text messages in my mind. "I miss you. I can't wait until we're together again." The thought of them sneaking around, laughing behind my back, it burned in my chest like acid. "How's work, Rachel?" I asked, my voice syrupy sweet. "It's been a while since we've caught up." Rachel looked at me, her smile faltering for a moment. She took another sip of wine, trying to compose herself. "It's good. Busy, you know. Things have been a little crazy, but I'm managing." I nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I'm sure Tom's been helping with the stress, right? You two have been spending a lot of time together lately, haven't you?" Tom nearly choked on his wine, coughing into his hand. He shot me a quick glance, confused by my question, but laughing it off nervously. Yeah, we've had a few meetings for work recently. You know, just projects and stuff." I smiled, my eyes fixed on Rachel. She looked down at her plate, her face pale, fingers tightening around her fork. The air in the room grew thicker, heavier. I could feel the tension building, like a taut string ready to snap. I got up, pretending not to notice their discomfort, and carried the dishes from the kitchen to the table, starting with the rosemary chicken. "I made all your favorites," I said casually, placing the dish in front of them. "I thought it'd be nice to celebrate." "Celebrate?" Rachel asked, her voice small. "Yes." I smiled again, but this time it didn't reach my eyes. "Celebrating friendship, trust, loyalty." Rachel's eyes darted toward Tom, and I could see the color draining from her face. Tom, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware, cutting into his chicken as if this was just another Friday night dinner. "So," I said, sitting back down and reaching for my wine, "how long?" Tom froze, his knife poised over his plate. He glanced up at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I took a slow sip of wine, savoring the silence before I spoke again. "How long have you two been sleeping together?" The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, cutting through the false normalcy like a blade. Rachel's fork clattered against her plate, her face a mixture of shock and horror. Tom's hand dropped, his expression morphing from confusion to panic in an instant. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "Sarah," Rachel began, her voice trembling, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said quietly, my eyes locking onto hers. "Just don't. I've seen the messages. I know everything." Tom's face turned ashen, his hands trembling as he set down his fork. I can explain," he stammered, his voice thin and desperate. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Wasn't supposed to happen like this?" I echoed, letting out a hollow laugh. "What was supposed to happen, Tom? Were you planning to leave me? Or just keep sneaking around, pretending nothing was wrong while you slept with my best friend behind my back?" He buried his face in his hands, groaning. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you. It just what?" I snapped, my voice rising for the first time that night. "It just happened? Is that your excuse? You've been lying to me for a year. A year, Tom. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Rachel sat frozen, tears welling up in her eyes, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Please, you have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything," I said, my voice cutting her off like ice. "I don't have to listen to your pathetic apologies, and I don't have to pretend you're my friend anymore. Friends don't do this. Friends don't destroy each other's lives." The room was deadly silent, the weight of my words pressing down on all of us. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked over to the sideboard. I reached for the cake I'd made earlier, a beautiful chocolate cake, decorated with care. I'd planned every detail of this dinner, down to the last bite. I placed the cake in front of them and smiled. "I made this for us, a celebration cake." Tom stared at it, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sarah, what are you doing?" "I just wanted us to celebrate," I said, my voice eerily calm. "After all, this is the end of something, isn't it?" Rachel's lips trembled as she stared at me, her tear-streaked face full of fear. "Please, Sarah, we can fix this." "No," I said softly. "There's no fixing this." I reached for the knife and sliced into the cake, cutting 3 perfect pieces. I placed one in front of Tom, one in front of Rachel, and kept one for myself. "Eat," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They stared at me, unsure of what to do. The tension was thick, the air heavy with unspoken words, but neither of them moved. I said eat. I repeated, more firmly this time. Rachel picked up her fork first, her hand shaking so badly she could barely lift the bite to her mouth. Tom followed, though his eyes never left mine, fear etched into every line of his face. I watched them eat in silence, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't here to poison them, or scream, or lash out. I wasn't here to get revenge in the way they might have feared. I just wanted them to sit in their own guilt, their own shame, and feel the weight of what they had done. They thought they were getting away with something. They thought they could carry on this affair in secret, living their lives without consequences. But tonight, I had taken that from them. As the final bites of cake disappeared, I stood up, wiping my hands on a napkin. "I filed for divorce," I said quietly. "It's done. Papers are signed. I'm walking away from this mess, and you two can have each other." Tom opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't wait for his response. I didn't need to hear his excuses or his pleas. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about taking back control of my life. I walked to the door, grabbing my purse, and turned back to face them one last time. "You deserve each other," I said coldly. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." And with that, I walked out, leaving them to pick up the pieces of the mess they had made. How do you feel about Sarah's reaction? Was her calm confrontation more powerful than rage? What would you have done in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, a sharp contrast to the tense warmth of the house I had just left behind. The door closed softly behind me, sealing them inside, the two people I had once trusted most in the world. I walked to my car, my legs feeling lighter than they had in weeks, maybe months. It wasn't relief exactly, but something close. Maybe it was the weight of the secrets finally lifting, the lies stripped away. I started the engine and glanced at the house through the rearview mirror. I imagined Tom and Rachel still sitting there, too shocked to move, the pieces of cake uneaten on their plates. For the first time, they were forced to confront each other without the comfortable veil of deceit. Let them deal with the consequences, I thought. I was done. As I drove away, the road stretching out in front of me felt endless, like I was leaving more than just a house behind. I was leaving a part of myself, the part that had been so trusting, so naive. I had always believed in the best of people, especially Tom. It seemed laughable now, how much I had trusted him. And Rachel, of all people, she had been like a sister to me. How could she betray me like this? The reality of their affair had only fully sunk in when I saw them together at the dinner table, side by side, as if they were still hiding something. But tonight, there was no hiding. They were exposed, and it wasn't my pain that hurt them. It was the truth, the bitter, ugly truth they'd been running from, now laid bare. I drove for a long time, not sure where I was going. It didn't matter. I just needed to keep moving, keep the momentum of the night going, or I might fall apart. Eventually, I pulled into an empty parking lot, the neon lights of a late-night diner flickering overhead. It was almost midnight, but the place was still open, glowing like a beacon in the darkness. I walked in, the smell of fried food and coffee hitting me instantly. There were a few people scattered around, truckers, night owls, people who had nowhere else to be. I slid into a booth near the back, feeling the soft vinyl under my hands as I sat. The waitress came by, her tired eyes barely glancing at me as she took my order. Coffee black. I wasn't hungry, but I needed something to ground me. As I waited, I replayed the dinner in my head, over and over. Their faces, Rachel's guilt, Tom's panic. It wasn't exactly satisfaction I felt, but something like it. I hadn't screamed, hadn't thrown things, or given them the reaction they might have expected. No, I had remained calm, composed. I had controlled the narrative for once. I had taken back the power they thought they had over me. But what now? What did I do with this new control? The coffee arrived, steaming in front of me, but I barely touched it. My mind was too restless. I had filed for divorce. That much was true. The papers were sitting in a lawyer's office, waiting for Tom's signature. Once that was done, I would be free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. But what did freedom even look like? I picked up my phone, staring at the blank screen. The notifications were piling up. Texts from friends, maybe even from Tom or Rachel. But I didn't want to hear from anyone. Not yet. I wasn't ready to explain everything, to spill the whole ugly truth. I wasn't ready for the sympathy, the pity, the inevitable questions. How could you not have known? That was the worst part. I had known. On some level, I had known for months that something wasn't right. The glances, the late nights, the way Rachel started pulling away from me in small, almost imperceptible ways. But I hadn't wanted to see it. I hadn't wanted to face the truth. It was easier to believe that everything was fine, that the life I had built wasn't crumbling beneath me. Now there was nothing left to hide from. I had torn down the facade myself. I finally unlocked my phone, scrolling through the messages without opening any of them. I hovered over one from Tom, sent just an hour ago, but I didn't click on it. Whatever he had to say, I didn't need to hear it. Not tonight. I put the phone down and stared out the window, the empty parking lot reflecting the dim glow of the diner's neon sign. I had no idea what was coming next, but I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't go back. I wouldn't let myself be sucked back into the lies, the excuses, the endless cycle of betrayal. I had broken free, and there was no going back to the way things were. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, though I had no memory of driving home. I must have come back sometime in the early hours, after the diner had cleared out and the adrenaline had finally worn off. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, letting the events of the night before sink in. I wasn't sure how I felt. Numb, maybe. Detached. But the sharp edges of anger had dulled, replaced by a strange kind of clarity. I got up, pulling on the same clothes I had worn to the dinner, and headed downstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet. Tom hadn't come home. I had expected that. Maybe he was with Rachel. Maybe he was sitting alone in his car, trying to figure out what to do next. It didn't matter to me. I made myself a cup of tea, the sound of the kettle boiling filling the silence. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers that were neatly stacked in a folder, waiting. A part of me wondered if I would feel relief once it was all finalized. Maybe I'd feel lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But right now, all I felt was tired. I picked up the folder, flipping through the pages mechanically. My name, his name, the details of our life together reduced to legal jargon and signatures. It was all so clinical, so impersonal. But that was how it had to be. There was no room for emotions now. We had crossed that line the moment he betrayed me. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It couldn't be Tom. Not this soon. I wasn't ready to face him yet. Not after everything. I walked to the door, my hand hesitating on the knob before I opened it. To my surprise, it wasn't Tom standing on the doorstep. It was Rachel. She looked terrible, her eyes red and swollen from crying, her face pale. She stood there, wringing her hands, barely able to meet my gaze. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Can we talk? Please." I stared at her, the woman I had once considered my best friend, now standing there like a broken shell of herself. There was a time when I would have welcomed her into my home without a second thought, but that time was long gone. "What is there to talk about, Rachel?" I asked, my voice flat. She swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything right now, but I am. I never meant to hurt you." I looked at her, the tears, the regret. But all I felt was emptiness. I stepped back, holding the door open. "Come inside." She walked in slowly, as if she knew this would be the last time. Should Sarah hear Rachel out? Or is there nothing left to say after such a betrayal? How would you handle a confrontation like this? Let me know in the comments. Rachel stepped inside, her movements slow and hesitant, like a prisoner walking into her own sentencing. The air in the house felt heavy, thick with the unsaid things between us. I watched her closely, wondering if she had rehearsed this, if she had practiced her apology, if she believed it could fix anything. Part of me wanted to throw her back out the door, to slam it in her face and walk away from her forever. But a stronger part, the part that needed closure, kept me rooted where I stood. "Sit," I said, motioning to the kitchen table. She sat down, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes darting nervously around the room. This was the same room where we had shared countless cups of coffee, where we had laughed and confided in each other. Now it felt foreign, like a stage set for an unfamiliar, brutal performance. I poured 2 cups of tea, though I wasn't sure I'd be able to drink mine. My stomach churned with a mixture of anger and anticipation. Rachel accepted the cup with shaky hands, the steam swirling between us like a barrier. "So," I said, taking a seat across from her, "you wanted to talk." "Talk?" Rachel flinched at the sharpness in my voice, but she nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know nothing I say can change what happened," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to understand it wasn't planned. It wasn't something we meant to happen." I let out a bitter laugh. "It wasn't planned? You carried on with him for over a year, Rachel. You lied to me every single day. You looked me in the eye and pretended like we were still friends. Don't tell me it wasn't planned." Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't moved by them. "It started when Tom and I worked on that project together," she said, her words rushing out now, as if she needed to get them over with. "At first, it was just flirting. I didn't think it would go anywhere. But then, I don't know, Sarah, something happened. We were both unhappy. He told me things about your marriage, things that made me think he was, I don't know, vulnerable. And I was going through a rough time with Mark, so I—" "Stop," I interrupted, holding up my hand. "Don't you dare try to justify this by blaming him or your relationship with Mark. You knew exactly what you were doing, Rachel. You knew it was wrong, and you did it anyway. You betrayed me." Rachel wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. I know, and I hate myself for it. You have to believe me, Sarah. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want it to go this far. But it did," I said, my voice cold. "It went exactly this far. You and Tom carried on your little affair, lying to me for a year. Do you know how stupid that makes me feel? To think that I trusted both of you, that I never suspected my best friend was sleeping with my husband? I gave you everything. I let you into my life, into my home, and this is what you do. You destroy it." She bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry. I ruined everything, and I'll never forgive myself for it." I stared at her, my heart pounding, waiting for something, some part of me to soften, to feel the familiar tug of empathy that I'd always felt with Rachel. But it never came. All I felt was the cold, hard truth. Nothing she said could undo what had been done. The friendship we had once shared was over, burned to ashes by their lies. "I don't care about your apologies, Rachel," I said, standing up, my hands trembling. "You can be as sorry as you want, but that doesn't change the fact that you destroyed my life. And now you get to live with that. You and Tom deserve each other." Rachel looked up at me, her face pale. "Please, Sarah, we were best friends. Don't do this. I know I hurt you, but we've been through so much. Please don't shut me out." I shook my head, the anger boiling in my chest. "You already shut me out, Rachel. You shut me out the moment you decided to sleep with my husband. You don't get to beg for forgiveness now." The silence between us was deafening. Rachel sat there, broken, her face streaked with tears. I watched her, feeling nothing but a deep, cold finality settling into my bones. This was the end. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. "I think you should leave," I said quietly, turning toward the door. Rachel didn't argue. She stood up slowly, her shoulders slumped, and walked toward the door. She paused for a moment, as if she was waiting for me to change my mind, to stop her. But I didn't. I simply stood there, watching as she walked out of my life for the last time. When the door closed behind her, the house fell into silence once more. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where Rachel had been, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It wasn't the kind of sadness that came with regret. It was the kind that came with finality, with knowing that something had ended and there was no going back. I spent the next few days in a daze. Tom didn't come home, and I didn't ask where he was. It didn't matter. The divorce papers had been sent to him, and soon, this chapter of my life would be over. I hadn't heard from Rachel since that morning, and I didn't expect to. Whatever she and Tom did next was their business, not mine. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. I hadn't cried, not since that night at the dinner. The anger had been a shield, protecting me from the deeper pain that lurked underneath. But now, with the house so quiet and empty, the weight of it all started to press down on me. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched tea that had gone cold hours ago. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years of trust, the laughter, the memories, the life I thought I had. It was all gone now, ripped away by the two people I had trusted most. A tear slid down my cheek, then another. Before I knew it, the tears came faster, until I was sobbing, my body shaking with the force of it. I cried for the betrayal, for the loss, for the emptiness that had settled in my chest. I cried for the life I thought I had, and for the life I would have to rebuild from scratch. But as the sobs slowly subsided, something else began to rise in their place. A sense of clarity, of strength. I wiped my eyes, taking a deep breath. I had survived the worst of it. I had faced the lies, the betrayal, and I had come out the other side. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine now, and I was free. For the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Sarah has faced the hardest truth, betrayal from the two people closest to her. Do you think she handled it the right way? What would you have done in her shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.